There are certain losses that cannot be measured because they are not recognized as losses when they occur. They arrive disguised as gains. Azena lived with her husband Musa in a comfortable apartment near the older part of the city, where the streets were narrow, the buildings carried the wear of several decades, and the evenings belonged as much to the people outside as to those within their homes. It was the kind of neighborhood where shopkeepers knew regular customers by name, and where conversations routinely drifted across balconies from one household to another. Nothing about the area suggested wealth, yet neither did it suggest hardship. Life there possessed a modest stability that many people overlooked because it lacked spectacle. Rent was paid on time, the lights stayed on, meals appeared on the table every evening. There was enough money for necessities, enough for occasional pleasures, and rarely enough to indulge every desire. Most residents accepted this arrangement without complaint, because they had long understood that life consisted largely of deciding which comforts mattered most. Musa belonged naturally to that world. He was not the sort of man people noticed immediately when entering a room. There were no grand stories about him, no impressive titles attached to his name, no dramatic ambitions constantly pulling him toward larger horizons. What he possessed instead was a steadiness that revealed itself gradually. He listened carefully. He kept his promises. He remembered things that other people forgot. When he said he would be somewhere, he arrived. When he committed himself to a responsibility, he carried it through. Many people spend years searching for extraordinary partners, while overlooking the value of ordinary reliability. Azena had never made that mistake. She knew exactly what kind of man Musa was. Some of her favorite memories involved nothing that would appear remarkable to anyone else. They were moments so small, they would have escaped notice entirely had they belonged to another couple. There were evenings spent sitting on their balcony after dinner, while the cities settled into darkness around them. There were long walks through familiar streets on weekends when neither of them had any particular destination in mind. There were power outages during which they lit candles and turned inconvenience into entertainment. There were mornings when they lingered over breakfast simply because neither felt rushed to begin the day. Looking back, Azena would later realize that many of the happiest periods of her life had been built from such moments. At the time, however, happiness seemed too ordinary to deserve examination. Like good health, it attracted attention only after it became uncertain. What Musa understood better than most people was the language of everyday companionship. He knew when Azena wanted advice and when she simply wanted someone to listen. He could recognize her moods before she mentioned them. Sometimes he would return home carrying a favorite snack she had not requested, but had been quietly craving. Other times, he would abandon whatever task occupied him simply because he sensed she needed company. These gestures were rarely dramatic. They did not generate photographs worth posting online. Yet, over the years, they accumulated into something substantial. Musa knew the shape of her thoughts in the way one learns the layout of a familiar house, not through study, but through long habitation. For a long time, Azena believed this would be enough. And perhaps, in another version of her life, it would have been. The difficulty was that people do not measure their lives solely against their own experiences. Whether they intend to or not, they compare. They compare their achievements, their relationships, their opportunities, and their circumstances against those around them. Most of the time, these comparisons occur so quietly that they escape conscious notice. They settle into the mind gradually, like dust collecting on furniture. One hardly notices their presence until enough has accumulated to change the appearance of the room. The first comparisons entered Azena's life through people she had known for years. A cousin married a successful businessman and moved into a house large enough to accommodate several families. A childhood friend began posting photographs from destinations that seemed impossibly glamorous. Another acquaintance launched a company that expanded rapidly, transforming her from an ordinary professional into someone regularly featured in business magazines. None of these people intended to make Azena feel dissatisfied. Most were genuinely kind. Some even admired the stability of her marriage. Yet, comparison requires no malicious intent. It functions automatically, drawing measurements between lives, regardless of whether anyone benefits from the exercise. At first, the effect was minor. She would scroll past a photograph and think little of it. She would hear news of someone's success and feel happy for them. Yet over time, the repetition began creating questions she had never previously entertained. She wondered what it might feel like to travel without worrying about expenses. She wondered what it might be like to purchase beautiful things without calculating whether they fit the monthly budget. She wondered how different her life would appear if financial limitations occupied a smaller role in her decision-making. These thoughts did not emerge from greed. That distinction mattered. Azena was not consumed by materialism. Rather, she found herself increasingly aware of possibilities that existed beyond the boundaries of her current circumstances. The awareness lingered, not constantly, not even every day, but often enough to become familiar. It accompanied her while browsing stores. It appeared during conversations about future plans. It surfaced whenever she encountered evidence of lives that seemed larger, freer, or more luxurious than her own. Most of the time, she dismissed these thoughts before they could settle. She reminded herself that she loved Musa. She reminded herself that many people would gladly exchange places with them. She reminded herself that contentment depended more on perspective than possessions. Yet there remained, somewhere in the quietest part of her mind, a small, unlocked door. She rarely approached it, almost never opened it, but she knew it was there. The irony was that Musa remained entirely unaware of this internal struggle, not because he was inattentive, quite the opposite. He simply had no reason to suspect it. From his perspective, their life was progressing exactly as planned. They were building something together, slowly, certainly, but steadily. Each year brought small improvements. Each challenge was met and overcome. The future appeared secure. If someone had asked him whether Azena was happy, he would have answered without hesitation that she was. And in many ways, she was. That is what made everything that followed so complicated. The greatest turning points in life rarely arrive when people are miserable. More often, they arrive when people are reasonably content, yet secretly convinced that something better exists just beyond the horizon. It is that combination, gratitude mixed with restlessness, that creates the most difficult choices. A truly unhappy person knows why they leave. A happy person knows why they stay. But a person standing between those two states often spends years trying to determine which voice deserves trust. It was during one such period of uncertainty, when Azena's life appeared stable from every external angle and complicated only within the privacy of her own thoughts, that Sultan Azma entered her world. At the time, she regarded the meeting as a coincidence. Later, she would understand that some coincidences arrive carrying the weight of entire futures. The friendship between Azena and Sultan did not begin with a single decisive moment. Later, when she searched her memory for the point at which harmless acquaintance became something more dangerous, she could never identify it with certainty. There was no line crossed, no dramatic confession, no instant that could be isolated and held responsible for everything that followed. Instead, the change occurred the way shorelines are reshaped by the sea, not through one powerful wave, but through the patient accumulation of thousands of smaller ones. A conversation after a corporate event. A message exchanged about a book one of them had mentioned in passing. An unexpected lunch. Another conversation. Another lunch. None of these things seemed important on their own. Yet, together, they began creating a space in her life that had not existed before. What unsettled Azena most was how easy it felt. Sultan possessed a kind of attentiveness that made people feel unusually visible. When she spoke, he listened with an intensity that suggested her words carried genuine weight. Most adults, she had long suspected, spent conversations preparing their next response, rather than absorbing what had just been said. Sultan appeared different. He remembered details. He asked questions weeks later about things she had mentioned only once. If she spoke about a challenge at work, he followed up on it. If she expressed interest in a place she had never visited, he somehow found a way to weave that place into future conversations. It was flattering, though she would not have admitted that word aloud. Flattery implied vanity, and Azena preferred to think of herself as practical. Yet there was no denying the pleasure that came from being observed so carefully. At home, life continued much as it always had. Musa still returned from work, carrying stories gathered throughout his day. He still paused at roadside stalls to buy fruit he thought she might enjoy. He still greeted neighbors by name and remembered birthdays that even close relatives forgot. Nothing about him had changed. If anything, he seemed happier than he had been in years. Yet Azena found herself noticing things she had previously overlooked. The apartment felt smaller. The furniture seemed older. Expenses that once appeared ordinary now struck her as limitations. She hated herself for these observations. They felt disloyal. Worse, they felt shallow. Yet, once certain thoughts enter the mind, they acquire a stubborn persistence. Ignoring them becomes more exhausting than entertaining them. The first time Sultan invited her to a restaurant beyond anything she had previously experienced, she spent half the evening studying the room. It occupied the upper floor of a building overlooking the ocean, and nearly every surface reflected some form of understated wealth. The glasses were impossibly thin. The lighting appeared carefully designed to flatter every face. Even the silence seemed expensive. Yet what stayed with her afterward was not the food or the view. It was the realization that everyone present behaved as though such luxury were completely ordinary. Nobody photographed their meals. Nobody expressed amazement at the surroundings. They inhabited that world naturally, the way fish inhabit water. As she watched them, Azena experienced a feeling she struggled to name. It was not envy exactly. It was closer to longing. The longing not merely to possess beautiful things, but to belong among people for whom those things required no explanation. That night, after returning home, she found Musa repairing a loose kitchen cabinet. Tools were scattered across the floor. One of the cabinet doors leaned against the wall beside him. The scene was so familiar, it should have comforted her. For years, Musa had approached broken things with the same quiet confidence. Whether it was a leaking tap, a malfunctioning appliance, or a piece of furniture threatening to collapse, he believed most problems could be solved with patience and enough time. Azena stood watching him for several moments before he noticed her. "You came at the perfect moment," he said with a grin. "I've almost convinced this cabinet not to fall apart." She smiled, because the joke deserved one. Yet, as she looked around the apartment, she became aware of something she had never considered before. Their lives seemed built upon constant maintenance. Repairs, adjustments, calculations, delays. Every comfort had required planning. Every improvement had demanded sacrifice. There was dignity in that, she knew. There was even beauty in it. But for the first time, She found herself wondering what life might feel like if things simply worked.